Welcome back, Mighty Vandals, to Tubs at the Club, brought to you by Snake River Stampede Whiskey, but we'll tell you a little bit more about that later on in the show. We're the Idaho Vandals affiliate on the Big Sky Podcast Network. Joined today, I am your host, Dallas Hammer, joined today with producer Martin. Martin, you got no byline on there. It's just Martin today.
Yeah, just Martin. I'm feeling a little keeping it simple this week after last week's game.
There's a little bit of foreshadowing. Keep it simple this week is going to be the theme. But guys, nobody gives a shit what I have to say. We're all here to listen to the one, the only. It's Trevan Pixley, but better known as Treeb. You can find him as Treeb Talks on Twitter. He is the Idaho Vandals reporter for the Lewiston Tribune. Treeb, our right track guide. How you doing, man?
I would completely disagree with that. I'm very interested to see what you have to say, Dallas and Martin, if you pitch in. I was very excited to bounce some things off with you, Dallas, today, because, you know, no disrespect to the self-proclaimed grandpa of the show, Brian, but, you know, the last couple of shows, it's been me and Marceau going back and forth. So I'm excited to be here with you today, Dallas.
Yeah, Brian had a little too much of the SRS today, so thanks for stepping in for him. Guys, we're just going to jump right in. We are talking about the final week of the regular season. Idaho coming off of a 31-29 loss to Weber State and got the baby Bengals of Idaho State in the Kibbe Dome this weekend. But I want to start first, Treeb. Obviously, Giovanni McCoy did not look super healthy at the end of that game. Took quite a few shots there against Weber State, was limping on the sideline from some of the reports that we had from our fans and followers that were in the stands. What do we got on McCoy this week?
You know, McCoy, he did look like he was limping around after that. I mean, he's questionable to go as of right now, but, you know, if Jack Lane is going to come in, he has experience against Idaho State, obviously being his only start as a quarterback. But, Giovanni McCoy dropping back to pass 51 times, you're going to feel the effects of that.
Yeah, so let's start first with Jack Lane. Obviously, Jack Lane played last year, got his first start against Idaho State. It's been a year now. Looks like, again, if Vonnie is questionable, you'd say, obviously he's the guy to go if he's healthy, but
yeah,
if he needs to take a week off, like again, what happened last year, Vonnie got hurt at the end of the year. Jack Lane had to come in and play the final game. What do you expect to see out of Jack Lane if he's the guy this week?
So, not as much explosion in the offense, I don't think, just based off of experience with Jack Lane, right? You gotta run more of your simple stuff on offense if you got Lane out there. I think he's a good passer, right? From the stuff that you see in practice and in camp, he has those flashes. He has those flashes like in the scrimmage. But, in game action, you're really going to kind of want to condense the playbook to make him feel comfortable. And, Anthony Woods, who's also questionable, but the coaches are optimistic that he's going to go. So you're really going to have to rely on Anthony Woods. And honestly, that is a huge part of what Idaho should be doing anyway in any given game that they play. So expect a healthy dose of Anthony Woods and Nick Romano. And like I see in the chat too, the offensive line obviously needs to play very, very just consistently in this one as well.
Yeah, so you mentioned obviously Tony Trees. I refuse to call him Anthony Woods now. I just call him Tony Trees at all times. Tony Trees obviously missed last week. You're saying coaches are more optimistic that we're going to get him back this week?
Yeah. I talked to Coach Jack yesterday, and he seemed more optimistic about him being able to go this week. And that's huge for Idaho. Idaho's offense goes as Tony Trees goes. I like that. I like that you call him that, but that's a good little thing. But I think he's gonna be a big difference maker in this one. He's a big difference maker for Idaho as a whole. I mean, You really look at games that they've lost. I mean, I wrote it in my columns and just previews in general. I mean, if they're not feeding him, they're losing ball games, or they are very, very close to losing ball games, and they need to feed that man.
Yeah, Anthony with 16 carries, 122 yards last year against Idaho State. Jack Lane, by the way, went 18 of 29, 255 yards, touchdown and a pick, and then took one sack in that game. For anybody that doesn't remember the box score, Idaho won that 38-7 in what was Charlie Raggle's final game. So let's kind of push forward to Idaho State a little bit, Tree. Then we'll circle back to talking Idaho and playoffs and everything that this means. Let's talk about this week's opponent and give them at least a couple minutes here before we move on. So last year, Charlie Raggle comes to Pocatello, has one single year there, goes 1-10, 1-7 in conference. Does a lot of shit. Yeah. Most of which I don't necessarily think was wrong. I think the way he went about it, that was wrong. And obviously just bailing after 1 year to become the associate head coach and special teams coordinator at ASU kind of left Idaho State in a pretty bad spot. They ended up
big sky shit right there.
Really, it honestly is. Big sky shit is the way to explain that. Yeah. Then we get into more big sky shit. The two finalists for the job are Cody Hawkins, offensive coordinator at UC Davis, and then Portland State's head coach Bruce Barnum. They go with Cody Hawkins. They've improved their 3-7 on the year. They have wins over Northern Colorado, number 22 at the time, Eastern Washington, and then also beat Portland State. And then their mutual opponents with Idaho, they beat Northern Colorado and Eastern just like Idaho did. They lost 28-20 to Montana, 51-16 to Sac State, 33-21 to Weber State. So Trebe, with a little bit of background there on the Bengals, what can you tell us about those guys?
Yeah, I think they're an improved football team. I think there's no doubt about that, especially offensively. I think through the air, they really kind of rely on big plays, and Idaho defensively against Weber State kind of, allowed those big plays. But other than that Weber State game, they've kind of been good defensively of not allowing those splash plays. But Idaho State kind of, relies on those big opportunities offensively. And, I think that's where they've made the biggest strides. But when they've played against, the better upper half of the Big Sky, they've struggled, obviously, playing Sacramento State. I think that's the biggest outlier in this game, where it kind of shows that Idaho should have an opportunity to run away with this one, is just by how dominant Sac State was able to perform against Idaho State.
Yeah, when you look at Idaho State statistically, not a team that you'd think lines up particularly well with Idaho. Obviously, Idaho not great. Brian Marceau from the research department commenting in to say Idaho is -7 turnovers this year.
Yeah.
Obviously, those types of things are not going to help win football games.
No.
But you look at Idaho State, they score just under 26 points a game. But Idaho has been gashed running the ball. Idaho State averages 2.7 yards a carry, averages 60 yards a game, the worst running attack in the conference. But with all that to say, they are the top passing attack in the country, or excuse me, in the conference, one of the top in the country. They have 337 yards a game, have a 2-quarterback system. Gets kind of weird there. Jordan Cook being the guy that throws the ball all over the place. Do you think that Idaho State has a chance to shred up Idaho's secondary, or do you think this looks like, hey, Idaho's biggest weakness is run defense? Well, Idaho State can't run the ball. This is pretty clean cut and dry.
Well, Idaho's secondary against Weber State, that was a quarterback in Munoz that I think was, up and coming, and he comes out and has probably his best game. I mean, he didn't throw as many passing yards, but he has these completions down the field that set up scoring drives and that, set up big opportunities for Weber State. I think Idaho State's in a very, similar situation. And Idaho, these young defensive backs like Andrew Marshall or Marnie Arnold, they had some of their worst games last week against Weber State. They're going to have to bounce back. They kind of finally started to look like freshmen against the Wildcats. But, other than that game, they've looked really, really solid. So they just need to kind of, look at what went wrong in that game. And if they perform well and kind of play to the caliber that they had all season, this should be a long game for the Bengals. They resort and go back to how they play like against the Wildcats. It could be an upset in the works. I'm not even going to lie. It's up there.
Yeah, that's kind of the thing. When you live and die by the pass, sometimes you can hang with teams, or other times you get absolutely shellacked, again, like Sac State just recently did to them. So Jordan Cook, 12 touchdowns, 12 interceptions, completing under 60% of his passes, but does have quite a handful of yards in there. Hunter Hayes is the guy that plays as well. He's been in the system for a couple years. He does lead the team in rushing, where he has 57 carries between his actual carries and his sacks, 228 yards and 5 touchdowns. When you get into looking at the running game, their top running back averages less than 5 carries a game, and their second and third guys average less than 5 carries between the two of them. This is going to be a team that is going to throw the ball all over the field. They have 4 receivers in the top 10 catches in the Big Sky. Sheldon James is the guy that's their leader. He's a 5'8" sophomore that only trails Hayden Hatton in yards and is above Hayden Hatton in both receptions and touchdowns. He's 92 catches, 8 touchdowns, 900 yards, having a heck of a season. They've got 3 guys behind him that are, again, the other starters. They pretty much just roll out 4 wide like it's an air raid offense. And truly, honestly, all 4 of those guys in the top 10 in catches. So, guys, you're going to see Idaho State throw the ball a lot, which is probably going to keep them in this game if Idaho can't get to the quarterback.
That's the biggest thing, hitting that. Keyshawn James newbie, this is going to be a big game from him. A Pocatello kid and, Idaho's biggest pass rusher. They need to get after the quarterback. That's the biggest thing, because Idaho State they're not going to run the ball. You basically hit it. And, the secondary has looked really good. They have the most efficient pass defense in the Big Sky and the top pass defense in the Big Sky, period. So, if they just play to the caliber that they have played against really the bottom of the Big Sky, like they always do, this should be, a blowout game.
Yeah, everything on paper is that Idaho is clearly a step ahead. I know that McLean Westbrook and the Jungle Land guys and the Jungle Twitter account, and they all obviously are gonna smack their shit. But you look at the offensive line; they've allowed 29 sacks, worst in the conference. Which, again, when you're throwing the ball on almost every play, that's going to happen. But they have trotted out 3 freshmen and a sophomore, and then 2 seniors that are guys that have played in more than half the games. This is a very young offensive line that they are going to ask a lot of. This is not an offense that's particularly efficient. They don't score a ton of points, but there are recipes here for, again, 337 yards passing. If those young corners in Idaho's secondary don't step up and don't recover from what happened last week, this could be a bad one, Treeb.
It could be a bad one, but if Idaho's offense can score points, that's the thing is Idaho's offense is so it has to work with its defense, right? It's kind of it's a dance, right? I mean, they build off each other. That's just how football works. But if Idaho can just do what it does well, right? Like why can't they do that? If they could just do what they do well, and that is have long sustained drives, have 4 10-minute drives in there where you just score touchdowns. And Idaho State, doesn't matter how many times they pass the ball, they just won't have time on the clock. And when they run with that philosophy, that's when they're the most dominant. And that's when Anthony Woods gets the most touches. That's when he gets the most yards. And that's when they win games. And, when they get ahead of themselves, when they fall behind that, they get far away from who they are. And that's when they lose games. So this Idaho State game has kind of that trap written on it if they fall behind early, but they just can't get away from their identity. And I think that's what's kind of cost them in a lot of games this year, even games that they've won, games that were way too close for comfort for a team that's considered a top 5 team in the nation. You are muted, Dallas.
It's been a while since I've done that. So we're going to get into that. A quick look at the Idaho State defense. They have 14 sacks on the year, second to last in the conference. They're second to last in points per game, second to last in yards per game. Like, this is not a terrifying defense. There are some really big names here that are guys that are doing really well statistically in the conference. Calvin Pitcher and Mason Young, their 2 safeties, are 3rd and 6th in the conference in tackles. They've got 2 defensive linemen, Cortland Horton and David Rowe, that combined for half of their sacks. So they have a couple guys that are going to be the names that are making plays. Their corners, Josh Alford and Tyler Bohannon, are both in the top 20 passes defense. Both guys right there on the edge of having double digits between their interceptions and pass breakups. But again, this is just kind of that empty stats because we're talking about the 11th scoring defense in the league. Treeb, is this a game that you think Idaho is going to get back to what they do? You mentioned in your article, Idaho is throwing the ball a ton over the last 3 games, which coincidentally, or the last 3 or 4 games, which coincidentally are some of the worst games they've played this season.
Yeah, they need to. I mean, I think Jason X kind of, he's a good coach, right? He's the coaching staff is one of the best in the FCS. There's no doubt about it. And I think he's one of those guys in post game that's quick to admit when there's like a coaching issue or where he's messed up. And I think he knows that there's times this year where they've gotten away from their identity. And I think with them having 7 wins, the possibility Giovanni McCoy's questionable, you might have a backup quarterback in there that if Anthony Woods is healthy and ready to go, maybe if he's still a little dinged up, sub in Nick Romano a little bit more than you have been. This is a good opportunity to get back to who you are, establish the run game, control the clock, and get a turnover on defense. For God's sakes, get a turnover on defense. You know what I mean? Like, just get back to who you are. You are muted once again, Dallas.
It's just a constant thing today. Today is just not my day. Guys, we're going to get back into Idaho football in just a second, but let me tell you about Snake River Stampede Whiskey. It's inspired by and produced in conjunction with one of the largest rodeos in the world, the Snake River Stampede, which is in the lovely Nampa, Idaho. This whiskey is created to pay homage to the great American cowboy. It's a blended grain whiskey. It's got a mash bill of 10% rye, 80% corn, and 10% malted barley. It's aged 4 years in first fill bourbon barrels and then 6 months in Oloroso sherry barrels. I almost said caskets and it totally threw me off. It's very smooth. It's sweet caramel. It's cherry. It's very light, very approachable. And they say it's best enjoyed around an open fire and under the stars in the sky. But I know that's not true because if you talk to Brian, the best way to enjoy SRS is with a Vandal victory. Hopefully we're going to get one of those this weekend. And if you get one of those this weekend, maybe Idaho gets a seed. Maybe it's time to break out the 1915 limited edition 100th anniversary whiskey. Maybe we crack into the good stuff. But again, for all your alcohol needs, guys, SRS whiskey. Bart Holt shouting out. He's got a shot of it in his hand right now. I know Brian, again, guys, Brian couldn't be here because he had a little too much of the SRS. But if the Vandals pull off a victory, it's SRS time. If the Vandals lose, it might be double SRS time.
Yeah,
guys.
double SRS. Yeah.
So Tree, you mentioned it. Gotta get back to the running game. That's what it sounds like the big plan is. As Martin is jumping in with the graphic here, getting Idaho back on track. So Tree, I'm going to bring this up because I know that Roger Dorn is hanging out in the comment section. To get Idaho back on the right track, what are your three strep throats to success? What are your 3 steps to success here, getting back on the right track, Tree?
First of all, they got to get back to something that I've already mentioned, a million times already. It's just having long drives. I mean, they were great at doing that last year, and there were flashes of it in some games this season, but they've really gone away from it. And there's been times in games like Montana State, for example, I could think of, a couple of drives where they held the ball for a long while. That 19-play drive, I believe, came in that Montana State game. And, they held the ball for a long time, 19 plays, scored. They can't just have one drive like that a game. They need to piece those together, hold the ball for a long time, and they have the talent, the players to do it. Step number 2, offensive line needs to play better. I mentioned in my column that they've kind of been the scapegoat this season. People have been kind of trashing the offensive line, and by people, I kind of mean, me in a sense, because, not a whole, the Tubs of the Club community a little bit, they don't get that much coverage, but the offensive line, allowing those sacks, but they are a young group. There's been some injuries, but, just consistency needs to be there. And even when they've been good, they haven't been great. They haven't been even really good. The standard of good is good with as many freshmen and sophomores that are out there that they have. I think that group can potentially improve to be one of the best groups in the Big Sky if they could, be together for a long time, kind of go through those lumps. But as of right now, they're kind of dealing with what they have. And defensively, just get a turnover. It's gonna present a lot of opportunities for it. They're going to be passing the ball, all game long. They're not going to be running it, as you said. So the ball's going to be in the air. They get a ton of pass deflections, a ton of opportunities to get the ball. They just never come down with it. So they really need to get a turnover. I mean, having a -7 turnover differential. I mean, I bring it up like almost every time I write an article. I mean, it is crazy, the night and day difference from where their defense was last year at creating turnovers, that being the biggest thing, to where they are now. And in some sense, their secondary right now is almost better than it was last year. You know what I mean? So it's a crazy thing. But those would be my 3 things.
Yeah, honorable mention to getting off the field on 3rd down. It's one of those things that I've noticed Idaho's struggled with a lot recently. The underlying numbers are not particularly good, but it's gotten worse over the last few weeks. One of those things that is not really a recipe for success when you're not forcing turnovers and you're not getting off the field on 3rd down. But Tree, who do you think is the guy that might finally break through and get some of those turnovers? Again, we're going to see Idaho State probably chuck up at least 50 passes. You got to think at least one of them is going to get picked off. If you had to take a bet, who's the guy that does it? Well,
everybody's saying Tommy is due, and I think, if there's anybody that's, bound to get a turnover, it'd probably be Tommy. But, a kid that I think deserves to get a turnover is X-Ray Alexander, because that kid is all over the field. He might be Idaho's best defender this year. At least he's up there, with some of them. He's had a stellar year, and I think if anybody's going to kind of, get that big turnover in this one, it should be him. Obviously, Marcus Harris had that turnover against Northern Colorado, but, maybe a multi-turnover game for Idaho would even kind of, boost some confidence, because even when they've gotten, 1 turnover in a game, it's kind of been forgetful because of how bad their turnover margin really is.
That's the thing. It kind of just gets forgotten about because across the body of work, obviously Idaho is just not getting the turnovers that they did last year. But Treeb, so we're talking here. Okay, we got to get a couple turnovers on the defensive side of the ball. If the turnovers don't happen, and if Tony Trees isn't able to play, and if Giovanni McCoy isn't able to play, and if some of the offensive linemen aren't going to come back and you're talking second string quarterback, second string running back. You're down to, again, third or maybe even fourth center, depending on if Vining is able to go. You're pretty ravaged across that offensive line. Obviously, the skill positions are doing great. Hatton's out there. I'm assuming Trainer took a shot in the back of the head, slammed it against the grass. I'm assuming. He's doubtful this week. Okay. Yeah. So you've got Hatton, you've got Jackson. I'm assuming Dwyer can step in at number 3 pretty easily there. You've got the skill positions. What's the worst case scenario for the Idaho offense here if those guys are injured?
I think it's still competitive. I don't think there's a world where Idaho State blows the doors off of Idaho or anything like that. I think even if all that happens, Idaho is still the favorite. As crazy as that sounds. When it comes down to it, it comes down to coaching, right? And Coach Eck and Schleissner, they just need to dial up long possessions. And they need to get those turnovers on defense. I mean, all those players are going to be out and things like that. But I mean, you mentioned I was kind of just thinking about if all the skill players aren't out, but if the turnovers don't happen, I mean, they need to cash in on those long possessions. And like everybody said too, I mean, turning those field goals that Chavez is hitting, granted, that's great that Idaho has a kicker that can convert those. They need to turn those field goals into touchdowns and just make sure that if you're not getting turnovers, you're securing tackles, because that's another big thing Idaho has struggled with big time.
Yeah, the yards after catch and the yards after first contact were not great numbers for Idaho last week. Pretty rough. I think that's one of the things our comment section is obviously exploding about right now is tackling has been a very large issue this year. I don't know that that's going to fix itself magically here in the final game of the season, as it has been a consistent year-long issue, but you're hoping against a team like Idaho State, they're going to be throwing the ball. Yes, you're going to have to obviously fill the run gaps, but when they're not going to run the ball very much and they're just going to chuck it all over the field, hopefully that's going to allow guys to tackle a little bit better when it's not guys running at full steam. It's hopefully guys take a catch and hopefully get lit up immediately. So, Tree, you've mentioned, hey, Idaho should still be the favorite here. Idaho should, on paper, win this matchup. Again, I know McLean is probably in the comment section frantically telling me that I'm wrong, but I mean, we're talking about a 3-win team that's maybe Idaho State's best team in what feels like a decade. And then we're talking Idaho, who should be going to the playoffs no matter what with the resume that they currently have, even if they lose this game. So let's talk about the playoffs and kind of what Idaho needs to do to position themselves. I know you're not a nationwide FCS reporter. I certainly am not. So again, this could all be completely wrong, but right now Idaho's the number 6 team in the country. You know that Montana and Montana State are playing against each other above Idaho. If Montana State wins that game, obviously Montana State jumps Montana, but Montana has the victory over Idaho, bumps Idaho down into clear-cut number 3 team in the Big Sky. Montana, I can't believe I'm saying this. If Montana wins this game, which we should all be hoping for, Montana establishes themselves as the clear number 2 team in the country. Montana State theoretically falls behind Idaho, and Idaho could still get a seed, but that's only if Idaho wins out. If Idaho loses out, we're probably not going to see that bye game. We might not even get a home game in the Kibbe Dome, but if we do, it's at the end of Thanksgiving weekend, and it's going to be a dead environment. Treeb, do you have any thoughts, any feelings, one way or the other, on FCS playoffs and what Idaho's got to do here?
I mean, they got to win, point blank. I mean, that's all they have to do. But I mean, from my perspective, I just think that Idaho deserves the seed. I think from what they were able to do, their body of work from the beginning of the year, they deserve to have that bye week. They deserve to have a home game. I think just not only from what they've been able to do on the field, but just with the fan engagement, right? Getting 2 sellout crowds after, just decades of being awful. I hate to say that, but, just decades of
but it's true.
struggling for you guys, and turning it around that quickly. I mean, that would be huge, and a win's big, and Montana wins big. So, there's a good story there, but, like you said, I'm not an FCS analyst, so, I don't really know how the bracket's going to shake up, or, what's going to happen at the end of the day. I'll be there for the selection show at the Lighthouse Suites, so we'll be filming the reactions for that. But, that's what I think. I think they deserve it, but we'll see what happens.
So again, guys, we will see what happens realistically when you're looking at the playoff schedule here. You've got Montana and Montana State this weekend. Obviously, that's going to impact Idaho in some form or fashion. South Dakota State should not lose to Missouri State. Furman should not lose to Wofford. South Dakota will not lose to Western Illinois. So most of the teams ahead of Idaho are going to get wins no matter what. They're pretty weak schedules at this point. So then you're looking at number 7 Delaware, who is currently right behind Idaho, playing number 12 Villanova. I don't know what's going to happen there, but there's obviously, if Delaware gets the win, they could certainly bump up over Idaho, and they might be able to say they should. If Villanova beats Delaware, do they jump all the way up over Idaho? I don't know. Then you go down to Albany. They're playing Monmouth. Probably not going to lose that game. North Dakota State, Northern Iowa is a big one. That's team number 10, North Dakota State against Northern Iowa, who's trying to get into the playoffs. So that might have something to do with Idaho. North Carolina Central, nobody cares. And then you have Sac State, UC Davis, Sac State being right behind Idaho. If they win that game and Idaho loses, you'd think Idaho would still be able to hang on based on the head-to-head matchup, but it would be Sac State's 8th win. All of this to say, guys, losing to Weber State last week was about the worst thing Idaho could have done for their playoffs, because now nothing is in control. Patty Frakes in the comment section saying, I'd be very surprised if we weren't a seed. So I really hope Patty's right. Patty's our big FCS expert around here. But right now, guys, you got to look across the FCS, and you just got to hope a bunch of things break Idaho's way. Obviously, all Idaho can control is the win against Idaho State this weekend. Yes, you heard it here. Idaho's win against Idaho State this weekend.
I'm very surprised that Idaho is kind of in this position right now. Like, you tell me at the beginning, well, okay, maybe not at the beginning of the year, but, after their non-conference slate, like, and really after the Montana game, I thought they were in firm control, but now they're kind of in a similar position to where they were last year. Because it was the 7th win was Idaho State, wasn't it? That's what it came down to last year. Yeah.
So 1 win ahead of where things were last year.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, it's very surprising to me. I mean, did you expect after that Idaho would be in this position at the end of the year?
I mean, it depends on when you're asking me that question. If you were to ask me that at the beginning of the season, I thought this was an optimistic place for Idaho to be on the edge of seeding. If you asked me this 3 weeks ago, I think, damn, Idaho's the number 2 team in the country, and they're going to be playing South Dakota State at the end of the year. Sweet. Yeah. And then obviously that's not what is happening right now. Obviously would still love to see South Dakota State hopefully in the finals and not in the quarters. But no, honestly, if you asked me at any point in the last month of the season, did I think Idaho was going to be having to hope and pray for a seed? Definitely would not have thought so. Tom Kendall jumping in to say, seems like youth and depth is hurting us at the end. It's what it feels like to me. Well,
and it seems like at that point, like a month ago, that youth and depth was a strength. That's the confusing thing. Like I don't know if like just the film, like right, that they've been shown up so much on film that these coaches now have seen more of what these young kids can do, and now they're figuring out how to attack these guys, which I'm sure that's 100% what it is, right? I'm sure that's what it is, but that's crazy how that flips in such a quick time in college football.
All right, guys, I think we're getting close to score predictions. It is about 35 minutes into the show. Treeb, do you have any final thoughts on Idaho before we move forward?
No, I was thinking about something witty. I was going to say one more thing on Idaho State, though. I think that they are on the right track.
God damn it. I was waiting for that. It was perfectly timed, Treeb. Before we get into score predictions, if you are looking for a great all-inclusive week-long vacation, don't look past your backyard. Hughes River Expeditions has been vandal owned and operated since 1976, and they're ready to take you on the vacation of a lifetime. Enjoy a multi-day trip down the Middle Fork of the Salmon, the main Salmon River of No Return, the Salmon River Canyons, or the Selway. You can check out special trips like one to see the Perseid meteor shower. You can camp on pristine beaches, or Brian's favorite use of that word. You could run amazing whitewater. You could hike scenic trails. There's wildlife to spot. There's obviously plenty of beautiful natural hot springs to hang out in. And again, guys, like I always say, the most remote stretches of river in the country. Just bring your clothes. Let HRE handle the rest. Grab a paddle, catch dinner, and ride the bull all throughout the Gem State. Call them now at 800-262-1882 or check them out at hughesriver.com. Got to give a shout out to Nick Weber here. Treeb, MVP. Love that. Roger Dorn, I'm sorry. You're just going to have to deal with this. Until you get on the right track, you're just going to have to deal with listening to this. So, Martin, I want to bring you back in here because I always like to send you first. Idaho State, which is no longer, interestingly enough, guys, no longer listed as the Battle of the Domes on the schedule online. Used to have that nice big Idaho Central Battle of the Domes logo, and it's gone now. So
you think Spud?
I'm just saying.
Spud? You think it's a return? I mentioned it in my notes today. As I said Battle of the Domes, but everybody wants it to be the Spud, so maybe I teased it.
We're hoping. We are hoping it's going to be the King Spud game at some point in the near future.
How heartbroken will the fans be if the Spud comes back and Idaho State beats Idaho?
Don't you put that evil on me, Ricky Bobby.
Sorry, I didn't mean to do that to y'all.
It's not something I want to think about.
That would be the okay. I hate to do this to y'all because I love y'all. I love the community. I love Idaho. I love you guys. But imagine a season where Idaho misses out on a seed and they lose the Little Brown Stein and the King Spud at the Kibbe Dome. That would be a terrible, terrible season.
As beloved Taylor Cash writes in the comment section, I'd be mashed. Martin, that's enough filibustering from us.
Yeah,
sorry. Score prediction: Idaho State.
Making an audible in my prediction on the outline. I'm gonna go Idaho 35, ISU 20.
2-touchdown victory. Love that. Treeb, what you thinking?
I'm gonna go Idaho 28, Idaho State 17.
28-17 from Treeb. Hitting the comment section real quick. Captain 58, 34-21. Idaho's got the home cooking going. Let me scroll farther here. Duffer's Tavern 31-21. Vandals win King Spud. Bart Holt 35-21. Tom Kendall 38-24. Crewhead 76, 35-17. Brian Marceau 31-21 Idaho. I'm going to have to go 27-20 Idaho. I'm getting closer to Treeb's thoughts there. We are not looking like Idaho's going to get into the 30s anytime soon. Been a while since Idaho's cracked that 30-point margin, and especially. Really oh, sorry. Go ahead, Treeb.
Oh, I was just going to say it really has. I didn't even think about it until you said it.
Yeah, Idaho just has not clicked fully offensively, and we're talking banged up Tony Trees. We're talking maybe Jack Lane comes in and plays. Maybe the offensive line is beat up. Roger Dorn 17-10. Steve Kurtz 45-14. Brian Kennison 42-21. Nick 63-6 Idaho. Crew had 76, changing it to 38-21. Oh no, sorry, that is the Boise State prediction. 38-21 for Utah State. Love that, Crewhead. Patty Frakes, I could see us rolling, not gonna lie. Really hope that happens. Again, I believe in Jack Lane. I think he would do a great job running the offense. I also obviously want to see a fully healthy Giovanni McCoy run out there and hopefully hang 60 on the baby Bengals, but just haven't seen that recently. It's tough to predict that Idaho could get into the 30s. It just hasn't happened in, unfortunately, way too long. But so it would be a good time to break through that streak. Hopefully get yourselves a bye, get healthy, and then go run through the playoffs. Guys, we're going to hit the most important game of the schedule first because that's how I like to do things. Top 5 Portland State at Northern Colorado.
Portland State.
we do like around the big sky thing here where we do like little blurbs for like each matchup. And it was Cal Poly against Northern Colorado, and I said like you're a sicko if you're watching this one, and I think this one's up there too. I'm gonna go Northern. I'm gonna say get a dub for them.
Trebe has Northern Colorado on the right track for the first time this season, getting a victory. Love that prediction. Brian and I are both on Portland State, as is the entire comment section. A shout out to Capdan58, Portland State cementing their top 5 ranking. This is verging on sicko territory. Portland State is just as mediocre can be, always have been, and really probably always will be. And Northern Colorado is just not fun at all.
You get on the right track this week, though.
But again, talking about Colorado getting on the right track, that could be multiple things getting on the right track there, Martin. Anyways, that was just an extra joke for Roger Dorn because the
it's been wrong before.
beloved Zach Kloss now being in the state of Colorado. Anyways, we're not going to talk about that because we're talking about fun things and good things like Vandal football. Next up, guys, NAU at Eastern Washington, another game that really doesn't matter much this week.
Eastern.
I'll pile on with that. I'll go Eastern too.
That's a clean sweep from the Tubbs and Trebe crew. All 4 of us saying Eastern. I got nothing about NAU. It's a program that I'm also just done with. Chris Ball's regime needs to just end. I know that they're just trotting out all these freshman quarterbacks, but for every RJ Martinez you hit on, you have a rest of a roster that just doesn't do much. Who cares about NAU winning 4 or 5 games a year? It's what Idaho was stuck in the Petrino era, and nobody cared about Idaho under Petrino. So, hell, most of the fan base didn't care about Idaho under Petrino, as you can see that obviously the crowds have started to slowly come back now that Eck has saved the program. The whole comment section saying Eastern, except for Nick Weber saying NAU, who also asked if we can make PSU UNC a relegation game. No, Nick, we can't do that. I'd rather send both of them out. Next game, guys, another barn burner here that everyone's going to care about. Weber State at Cal Poly.
I got the Fighting Barbecues of Ogden, Utah.
Weber State by 1,000,000.
Yeah, Brian and I both saying Weber as well. Guys, Cal Poly is terrible. Honestly, since we branded them Coward Poly in the spring season, they have done nothing to shed that nickname. Really hoped that Bo Baldwin was going to turn that program around. Obviously, he left just like Charlie Raggle did for the bright pastures of the Pac-12, now soon to be Big 12 or wherever the hell Arizona ended up.
Big 12.
Thank you. Arizona and Arizona State in the Big 12. Whatever, don't really care. They're moved on. Cal Poly's terrible. Weber's going to win this game. Now, guys, to the last 2 games, which are unfortunately the 2 most boring games on the schedule. Again, I'm being extraordinarily sarcastic about that. This game actually really does matter. Sac State at UC Davis. To quickly recap, again, this is the Causeway Classic. This is their big rivalry game. It's at UC Davis this year. If UC Davis wins, they get to that magical 7th win and might get into the playoffs. They would hold Sac State at 7 wins, and then Sac State doesn't really have much of a resume outside of their FBS win over Stanford. This is where things can get weird. UC Davis wins this game. Maybe both teams miss the playoffs. Sac State wins the game. They're obviously into the playoffs. This is where things could get spicy. Land Larison is back. Shout out Patty Frakes. I'm sure he's going to drop that in the comment section because he has to remind everyone that because it's a very important thing to remember. UC Davis looked absolutely terrible without Land Larison, and now that he's back, he might be the best running back in the conference. Anyways, with all of that lead up, Martin.
Davis.
Sneaky Aggies. I'm not that impressed by Sac State. I haven't been all year, to be honest with you. And I'm gonna go Sac State, though. I know I just said that, but I'm gonna hold true to it. So
hey, I respect it. Again, talking back to back Big Sky champs there. Obviously a little bit more of a down year this year, but also Dan Hawkins' squad didn't look great when they didn't have Land Larison. Brian says Sac State. I'm also going to go UC Davis here, so we're going to really split this one down the middle. If you go through the comment section here, Sac State, Tom Kendall. UCD, Nick Weber. UCD, Bart Holt. Let's get weird, Taylor Cash. Davis by 10. Sack, dirty as fuck. Hope Davis wins this. Captain 58. Steve Kurtz. Sack wins and qualifies for the playoffs. And Crewhead 76 putting the button on it. Nutsack State wins.
I love that.
So pretty mixed one. I think this is, honestly, to me, I think this is going to be the game of the week. I think this is the one that's going to be the closest. It's certainly not the two best teams on paper matching up, but I do think this is going to be probably the most fun of the games. Also because I have no rooting interest. It doesn't matter to me which team wins or loses this game. With that said, guys, the big one, the brawl of the mild. They're going to love the fact that I said that. Montana State at Montana, number 3 at number 2. Martin, I know who you're picking, but give me the reason anyways.
I feel like Montana State, they just need that big win, and they just need to shut up their little brothers in the state.
I tend to agree with Martin. I think I'm gonna go. Where is this game at?
It is at Montana.
Oh my god! It's
shit. I could have just said it was in the state of Montana, and then I could have just really left you spinning there.
You really
no,
could have.
It is at Wagriz.
You know, they've been kind of defying the odds all year. No one kind of gave Montana anything, and you know, just to make my job a little more fun, I'll go Montana.
Trebe going Montana, Martin going Montana State, Brian going Montana. I would have loved to get his thoughts on that. Brian coming from a Montana household. Obviously, he's got the Montana side and all of his research and stats, but unfortunately, that SRS hit a little too hard today. Hitting the comment section before I give my thoughts. Tom Kendall, can't pick FTG, got to go Cats. Roger Dorn, Montana 30, Montana State 28 after missing a game-winning field goal. Probably wide right. Haven't seen that before. Nick Weber, UM. Austin Pimentel, Cats 56, Grizz 7. That is nuts. I actually wouldn't mind seeing that, though. Steve Kurtz, Grizz over Cats. Bart Holt, I despise both equally. Montana if it benefits Idaho, but the Cats probably win. Guys, this is the first time and only time in my life I'm ever going to root for a Montana victory. It's what Idaho needs to have the absolute best shot at a seed. I think that there's still a chance that Idaho gets a seed if they win and Montana State wins. But the best chance Idaho's got is for Montana to win this football game. And unfortunately, I think Montana State is a considerably better football team than Montana. I know that Montana is number 2 in the country, but realistically, you take away that Idaho win, what else do they have? Not much. You look at every single phase of each of these teams. Okay, Montana's got them beat in special teams. That's for sure. But outside of that, I just don't see how Montana holds up against the Montana State offensive line. Feel like they push them around. I don't think it's going to be a huge blowout, but I do think the Bobcats are going to win, which is just going to make this even more difficult for the Vandals. That game is early in the morning. It's 11 o'clock Pacific time. Vandals kick off at 4 Pacific time. So Idaho will know before kickoff which of these teams win and have a little bit better idea of what's at play, what's at stake. But it feels like because I've never wanted Montana to win a game before, like I have this one. It feels like it's Montana State tonight, guys. Or Saturday morning, I guess.
It's kind of lame that's the morning kickoff, you know.
It really is. It's the worst time. That game feels like it should be a 7 o'clock kick on ESPN2 every year. I just don't understand why it's not.
Well, it's lame too because, you know, the lead-in shouldn't be 11-4 for Montana, Idaho. It should be 4-7 for Idaho. You know,
bingo.
It should be that way.
Yeah, would make a whole lot more sense. Going through the rest of the comment section here, Crewhead 76, Bobcats, Hauk is a douche. Don't care where he's at. Fully agree with that. Captain 58, FTG. Believe in my heart of hearts, MSU is better, but gotta root for the Grizz. Montana by 2. Bart Holt, Montana in overtime. Brian Kennison, shout out. Utah State 42, Donkey State 17. I'm going to go one better and say Utah State 69, Boise State 0, because fuck them, that's why. And then shout out Tom Kendall, Ducks 6, Sharks 1. Sorry about that, Tom.
Dallas, can you spin for like 2 seconds?
Yes, I can absolutely spin for 2 seconds because Martin.
Somebody might be joining.
What I want to say before, who I think is going to be joining us, what I want to say, guys, Tubbs at the Club used to break news on occasion. Kind of had a big moment here a couple years ago with a coach that may or may not have been getting fired, and then, hey, Tubbs is the one who broke that. You'll notice we don't do that quite as much anymore. It's because we now have our patreon.com/Tubbs at the Club, where we have our Discord channel set up. That's where the news goes now. We keep things private. We keep things in-house. Obviously, if we had to break some sort of major story like that, yeah, that would probably get out there. But if you're wanting to keep on the pulse of Vandal football, our Discord's a pretty good place to do it. Any sort of news about guys playing or not playing, that usually comes out in the Discord first. Sometimes it's because we've got eyes there that can say, oh, hey, Anthony Woods isn't in pads. He's on the sideline in a jersey, not in pads. Pretty easy to break that one. Other times, there are going to be things that we tell our patrons because we love and support them, and they love and support us. But sometimes we just don't say things out in the public. So if you're looking for some special news, patreon.com/Tubbs at the Club. You might get some extra news this week if you go check it out. Only $2.50 a month. Obviously, you can pay us more, and we certainly are thankful for that. But it's only $2.50 a month to get in. I see now Martin, who's waiting for us in the lobby. I don't know if he's on the right track because it's dark.
He's not on the right track at all.
Certainly doesn't look like it. You've got it here, folks. Treeb, the right track guide, is saying not on the right track, but Brian Marceau joining
Brian
us live.
is trying to represent the blackout stuff.
Yeah. Brian, can you hear us?
Yeah, 100% chance I'm on my drive back home from work. But you guys can hear me, right?
Yes. No,
okay.
Actually, we can't hear you. Yes,
you
sorry, Brian. Yes, I'm responding yes because I can hear you. You are live on Tubbs at the Club. I forgot that your grandpa Brian. You wouldn't have been able to understand that I was joking about that. Yes, you are live to the world.
Okay. No, dude. Hey, you brought up the Montana State angle, and okay, the intrigue for me in the matchup is that's that elite FCS level strength on strength. In Big Sky play, Montana defensively is allowing 2.3 yards per rush. It is easily the best in the Big Sky, and like the second best is UC Davis at 3.2. After UC Davis, it feels like Montana and number 3, and then of course Montana State is the best rushing team in the nation. So there you go. And Montana itself, I guess one of the things there about Montana, Doss, you brought up what have they done other than Idaho. Well, they beat the shit out of Sacramento State 34-7. If you watch that game, Montana broke Sacramento State. I mean, hell, last week Sacramento State barely handled Cal Poly, and they've benched Caden Bennett since then. So, Montana is essentially the hottest team in the FCS other than like South Dakota State. So, hey, that's the intrigue on that matchup is, can the nationally elite Bobcat ground game, how's it going to handle the nationally elite rush defense? And, factor in last 3 or 4 games, Montana's putting points up on the board. And when they're doing that, hey, they're just a different team.
Brian, I know you've picked Montana, and I know you just gave us reasons why, but can you give us a specific key to the game of why you're picking Montana over Montana State this weekend?
The big thing for me is, of the things Bobby Hauck does as a coach, when his teams harness momentum, like they handle it in a way that just other teams don't. And how, like, Bobby Hauck has that team believing that they're, that they should be the number 2 seed. They should be playing in a championship, through the FCS playoffs, not just the Big Sky. And honestly, since Idaho, Montana has been playing like a team that's essentially believes they can kick the shit out of anyone, and that's all they've done since the Idaho game. So it's this weird thing where, to me, it's intangible, but Montana looks for real. They also have the single best defensive player in the Big Sky, Alex Gubner, on the D line, the single most disruptive guy in the conference. He's kind of the key to everything they do. And dude, the Grizz when the Grizz are humming like this, and hey, Clifton McDowell he's become comfortable, and Montana's putting up points. They're just different than what what they were for the first half of the year. And again, you can also look at them post Idaho. They have been killing everyone since they beat Idaho by 2.
Brian, you said humming, and all I can think about is hashtag only Tubs. So, gotta be honest, you totally lost me there. I'm kidding. By the way, Alex Gubner, absolutely incredible player, and that is a great point to make. They've got the biggest disruptor on their side of the field, so not something that's a bad sign necessarily if you are, again, one of the Vandals that unfortunately has to root for Montana this weekend if you want to see Idaho get a seed. But Brian, you're the one who I have no idea where the hell you are. It's just pitch black. Any final thoughts before we wrap this show up?
Yeah, hey, the Sac State UC Davis game worth thinking about. Sacramento State benched Caden Bennett, so they're starting Carson Conklin, true freshman. It's the second start. He started against Cal Poly, but he also played about 3/4 of the game against Idaho State when Sac State won 51-16. So he's a much better pure passer than Bennett, but he's not a threat on the ground. And then just playoff picture, hey, you hit the big points, but just a couple things for Vandal fans who are new to the selection process. Some of the games to pay attention to, you hit Delaware and Villanova. That's a huge game to pay attention to because whoever wins that, they're going to finish with 1 loss in the CAA, which is the number 3 conference in the FCS. Mm-hmm. So you'd expect if Delaware picks up that win, they're for sure going to finish above Idaho. But if Villanova picks up the win, doesn't necessarily mean they're going to jump. The North Dakota State, Northern Iowa game, I'm nervous about that because if there's a team that I think is going to get bullshit historical selection committee points, which that absolutely exists, that absolutely happened with North Dakota State last year, is North Dakota State. If North Dakota State wins, they'll be tied at 8-3 with Idaho. And that makes me a little bit anxious that North Dakota State's history, which weighed on their selection last year, will weigh on their selection again. So those are kind of things that make me nervous. Of course, Patty Ferks brought up if Idaho wins, they should be a seed. I think they should be 2. But, there's a world where if everything breaks against Idaho, then suddenly you're in that human error area of are you going to be 7, 8, or 9 where you don't get that bye. So if Idaho can, if at least if North Dakota State can lose, or if Delaware can lose, or if Montana can win, I think if any of those 3 things happen, Patty's probably right about the seed. If none of those 3 things happen, then we're watching Sunday morning, wondering what in God's name is going to happen.
That's a good tease for Sunday morning. Trebe, you're going to be there. I believe it's at 9:30 in the morning. Is that correct?
Too early for me, but yeah, 9:30 in the morning.
There we go. We got the right track guide, hopefully keeping the Vandals on the right track this weekend and on the right track on Selection Sunday. Trebe, any final thoughts for you? Even just want to tell the people where they can find you, which I would hope all of them know by now, but hey, shameless self-promotion is always a good thing.
Hey, yeah, if you want to follow me on Twitter, you can, at Trebe Talks. That's where I'm the most active. And if you want to read my stuff, you can on the Loose and Tribune. It's the best way you can support me. Most of my stuff's on Twitter. I live tweet a lot of the games. I'm covering a lot of Idaho men's and women's basketball right now. So, you want to stay in the loop with that, make sure you drop me a follow as well. The right track guide never sleeps. I got to make sure I point the original team that I was trying to point in the right track on the right track here this basketball season. So
with that said, guys, thank you for listening to another episode of Tubs at the Club. Again, you can follow us along on patreon.com/Tubs at the Club. It's only $2.50 to get in. You can obviously pay us more if you'd like, but it's a great place to hang out and talk Vandal football. Home games, it's a little bit quieter because there are quite a handful of people that go, but even if you're not, it's a great place to hang out, great place to talk Vandal football with people that aren't necessarily the doom and gloomers on the All Vandals board, which can be great at times, but I know that it does rub people the wrong way on occasion. With that said, thank you everybody for listening in. Thank you, Trebe, for being here. We very much appreciate you. Brian, any final thoughts from the darkest pit of hell that you're reporting from?
No, dude, other than it's just so goddamn crazy. Football season, regular season's coming to a close. We'll hit our closing thoughts whenever the year's over, but If you can get to the dome, get to the dome. It's buy one, get one, half off tickets. So if you can make it, essentially every person we can get there, it's going to matter. This is, you guys hit all the huge points on the two teams, but Idaho getting a seed in the second year would be a huge damn thing for Idaho. So if you can get to the dome, I'll be there. I'll see you guys there at 4:00.
Yeah, Brian, kind of alluding to it a little bit there, guys. It is senior night. We got to get bodies in the building to say goodbye to some of these seniors. This might be the last time we get to see them in Vandal uniforms in person if things don't break our way. Very last thing, Brian Kennison asking me multiple times my thoughts on Boise State. Unfortunately, Brian, I didn't want to bring them up because I think Boise State did the right thing by firing their coach. I was hoping for a lifetime deal for Avalos. Obviously, you could watch that program just completely collapse. Last year, honestly, was the collapse. I know that it ended last year really well, and he got, I think, even Mountain West Coach of the Year. But everybody that was paying attention to Boise State football knew that Dirk Cutter came in and saved that program for that year. And then the second he was gone, boom, the whole fucking thing collapsed. Unfortunately, they understood that as well and pulled the plug. I am afraid that they will get the hire correct. Hopefully they won't. They got it wrong last time. There's nothing that's changed about their decision-making process. I think they're still going to screw it up, but I will say that at least they've got a coin flip now rather than knowing it was the wrong guy. So for us as Vandal fans, that's a total bummer, but who cares? Fuck them. They had a bad year. Hopefully they lose out. Don't make a bowl game. Two big middle fingers right down there to the center of the universe. 4:00, guys. Idaho State for the former Battle of the Domes, the current, hopefully, King Spud game. With that said, guys, go Vandals.
Go Vandals.